All right, welcome everybody. I'm Chris Judge. I'm your host for Lunch and Learn. This is our first Lunch and Learn lecture of 2025, obviously. And before I introduce our speaker for today, next time our Lunch and Learn speaker will be Dr. Keith Ashley. He's an archaeologist at the University of North Florida. He's been working in Florida for a really long time on pre-contact Native American sites. And that'll be a virtual lecture, by the way. Fortunately, he's not going to drive up here from Jacksonville. We'd love to have him, but he's not going to be able to. And his title is Excavations at Sarah Bay, Unearthing the Center of Makama, which is Tamukan town. And they've excavated the council house there. It's only the second council house ever excavated in the state of Florida. With us today is Joshua Shumak. And he is the Native American Affairs Coordinator for the South Carolina Commission for Minority Affairs. He's a great friend of the center. He comes to a lot of our programs, and as I go around the state to programs that Native Americans are doing, powwows and events, he's usually there. He gets around a good bit. He has an Indigenous Leadership Academy degree award from the Arizona State University. He went to the College of Charleston, got a business degree. He graduated in magna cum laude, dean's list, and president's list. Every semester he was there. And then he got an MBA from the University of South Carolina, which I'm reminded that is one of the best business schools in the country. He is a member on the board of directors of the state-recognized Tribal Artists Guild. Back almost a little over a year ago, he was awarded an award from the National Association of Secretary of States by our Secretary of State, Mark Hammond. He got the John Lewis Youth Leadership Award. Is that John Lewis, the civil rights leader? Very cool. He's a member of the Wassamaw tribe of Varnertown. He served as secretary. He has served as publicist or media guy and is vice chief at the moment. And then back in the summer, the United Nations invited him to Geneva, Switzerland for the 17th Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous People and got to represent himself, his tribe, and really the whole country's Native Americans. So without further ado, please make welcome Josh Shumak.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Thank you all for coming here, both in person and virtual. We'll get started, and this lecture is going to be about revitalizing heritage and Native American affairs in South Carolina. It's going to go over briefly a little bit about first contact and where we first start getting to the state, actually starting with Native American affairs, policy, and legislation. And let's begin. So one of the things that I really want to start off with is what is a settlement tribe, because a lot of people don't really sometimes know that definition. So the settlement tribe is defined as a group of Native people who have been forced in the same spot and who come together to create another distinct entity. So the federal government defines that as a group of Native people who've come together and have been identified as Native people since the 1900s and prior. So let's move on to an example. As Chris Judge just told everybody, I am a member of the Wassamaw tribe of Varnertown Indians. So we come from a number of tribes, two of which are the Edisto from Edisto Island and the Etowah from Daniel Island in the Charleston Peninsula area. So we were pushed into the Goose Creek area, put onto the Cherokee Pass, and we had documented Cherokee and Catawba people marrying into our tribe in the 1700s going forward. Another settlement tribe that a lot of people may be aware of is the Edisto Natchez Cusco, who are the descendants of the Cusco and the Natchez, who settled by the Edisto River, and they took on the name Edisto. So first contact. For the East Coast tribes in South Carolina specifically, we were one of the first contacted states, first contacted Native people. Of course, we have Charlestown Landing, which was official first English contact. But for my people, our first contact was on Edisto Island in 1562 by the Spanish, and then by the English on Daniel Island in 1609. And for a lot of tribes, first contact came, and then of course what happened after first contact was tribal migration and removal. So tribes migrated a lot of times because of lord proprietors were granted land, and then they moved the tribe off that land, or they were granted other lands that they were then moved off of again. So, for example, once again, for Daniel Island, for the Etowah Indians, the reason why we were moved off of Daniel Island is because it was bought by a man named Robert Daniel. And previously, the island itself was called Etowah Island, and then we were moved into the St. James Goose Creek area. Tribal migration didn't just happen within South Carolina, between tribes of South Carolina, but it also happened with tribes outside of South Carolina that then moved interior. Like we mentioned earlier with the Edisto Natchez Cuso, the Natchez part of that tribe, there was the conflict of the French and Indian War, which caused the Natchez to move down and eventually enter South Carolina. I think they stayed up with the Catawba for a brief period of time, and then they moved further coastal, and they eventually were settled very near to the Cuso Indians, and then they started to intermarry, and that is how we have that tribe today. So talking about what really shaped the landscape of Native American tribes today is a lot of conflict, a lot of death. One of the things that really dwindled Native American numbers were, of course, disease. And one of the most known about wars is the Yamasee War. So the Yamasee War wasn't just between the Yamasee and the English settlers. It was between a number of tribes. The Yamasee, I guess they just got all the credit, but historically, many tribes declared war on the English settlers for violating a lot of different agreements, be it about trade or hostile aggression. Technically, I don't think the Yamasee War ever ended because there are some tribes that never really made peace. But eventually the war did come to an end for the Etowah who were involved in that war. Initially, we fought on the English side of things, but due to a lot of the bad sentiments towards Native Americans, we switched sides. And after that, a lot of tribes' numbers continued to dwindle. And this is one of the main reasons why many tribes were declared extinct, because their numbers got so low and they were dispersed after the war. So talking about settlement, as I mentioned, we were settled upon the Cherokee Pass, as you can see right there in that highlighted area. That is specifically where we were pushed. That is Carnes Crossroads, and we do have our historical marker there. Oh, I think I'm missing a slide. But talking about the creation of America, a lot of the tribes predate American politics. They were, at the time of the creation of America, already mentioned a lot of documents as residents of the state, where it lists out the Cuso, the Etowah, the Wando, the Catawbas, where you're not supposed to bother them because they are residents of the state, or there are agreements that were made. For a lot of tribes, the agreements were made with the Commons House of Assembly and the General Assembly. One of the things that were discussed was land that was given in the 1720s. Land was given to the Etowah tribe in Wassamasaw Swamp. That's where we get the name Wassamasaw from, connecting waters. There was also similar agreements to give land to the Cuso. And there was a lot of agreements that were in the works to give land to many other tribes around the state. Of course, this would predate the conception of reservations, because reservations is a completely different idea that was generated much later in history. But this is the main reason why a lot of tribes eventually didn't get land, because a lot of those plans to officially give them land were scrapped. So talking about the Native American landscape, this is a map from 1978. And as you can see a lot of the settlement tribes that eventually would become the state recognized tribes, or where a lot of the tribes are pushed. Of course, you can see Varnertown, you can see the Catawba, you can see where some of the Lumbee were, you can see the Santee, the Natchez Cuso, White Oak, which is like Santee Indians, the Chavises were the Beaver Creek Indians. So talking about a policy that started to affect Native American people. So in South Carolina, there were no boarding schools built in South Carolina, although we did have people who were removed from South Carolina to other boarding schools. My grandfather, he was removed to a boarding school in North Carolina. But one of the things we did have, based on some state mandates in some areas, were mission schools that were built directly into tribal communities. So this is a picture from the St. Barnabas Mission School. This was very affected by the Driggers family in my community. So mission schools are basically made in tribal communities to Christianize tribes. There was a lot of baptism rules and records, and a lot of the documents from this time period do a lot of those very generic statements about, saving the child and their animals to be shepherded, things along that line. This is just one of the pictures from the St. Barnabas, but there are many others out there. Before the school was built, they actually had it in Miss Trigger's home, and then later it was moved to the school church. And there were many other similar schools built throughout the state, throughout other tribes. So let's go into anti-miscegenation. So at this time period too, there was a lot of anti-miscegenation going on. This basically meant that you were not allowed to marry outside of your race, but really what that meant is that you could not marry white people. So there was a lot of, at this time, intermarriages between tribes. So a lot of tribes, especially when they are grouped so close together, have a lot of kinship ties to one another. For example, in my tribe, we have a lot of people who are married into the Edisto and the Santee. So that's a lot of our Dangerfields who married into both tribes. And in both of those tribes, you have a lot of Mucklevaneys and Muckinfusses. And there's a lot of names that, although unique to these specific tribes genealogically, there are a lot of mixing that has gone on. And you will also see a lot of times, especially in the low country tribes, where there was a really big integration between some tribal members and the African-American community for some Afro-Indigenous roots. Talking about the mission schools, they worked. Many of the tribes of South Carolina are Christian tribes. A few decades after the mission schools, the tribes themselves started to create their own churches. So this is just a picture of our community church from the Wassamasaw tribe. There were similar churches built in some of the other tribes, notably with the Santee and the Edisto tribe. Not only do we all build churches of the same denomination, we actually had circuit pastors who were pastors from the community in the community. I know that the Edisto Natchez Cuso, they still maintain their church. I believe Chief Creel, he is a reverend. So mission schools really did accomplish their mission, where a large number of Native American people in South Carolina are Christianized. So now we're moving into the area of state mandated Indian schools. So of course, with segregation came the segregation of schools, facilities. One of the things that was mandated by the state were these Indian schools. Many of the tribes had them. There were some that were shared by many tribes, like the Red Door School, Pineview School. And of course, we had our Varner Indian School. It was established in 1939. We had many family members who attended. There's actually a lot of documentation from when the Study Center interviewed a lot of people from many of the tribes. I think it was partnered with Know It All and SCETV. And so many of the alum who are no longer with us today, you can find those documents where they talk about what they went through in these one-room schoolhouses, and some of the segregation, especially after desegregation happened. So the schools desegregated mainly in the 60s. I believe this school desegregated in 63. I think the longest running one was the Edisto Natchez Cuso that desegregated in 1970. And we got a video right here of that news clipping. Getting back to the PowerPoint, but that was a news clip that was released that year. If I can... Yes. Regarding the closing of the Four Holes Indian School, that is the school that was mandated for the Edisto Natchez Cuso children. There we go. And I am sharing once again. It did not share the right screen. Give me one moment, please. I am so sorry. Okay, let's go with this. That is, go back down. So that was only about 50 years ago, a little bit over. But it is very interesting how we see the conversation go from segregated Indian schools to we have racial hostilities in school trying to desegregate to now you have in schools a lot of people who don't even know that there were Native Americans in South Carolina or the continued existence of them. When desegregation happened, a lot of the schools did not accept Native people at the time. There was no bus routes going through these Native communities to get them to the schools in some cases. And some of the people just dropped out and started working trade with their family. Of course, a lot of the community members were tradespeople, where it was woodworking, construction, or there was community businesses that they started to work at. So real integration did not happen until much later after desegregation. So this is another thing. We're going back in time a little bit. This is from 1937. It is an image that some people may have seen online. I know I constantly see this online. This was when the American Farm Bureau came through our community, the Varnertown Indian community, during the Depression, when they were taking pictures of farms. And one of the pictures that they took was of my great-great-grandmother, Geneva Varner Clark. And she came out, she put on her her cloak, and she had her children with her. This is one of the only known pictures of a Low Country Indian in the Library of Congress. And what it is titled as is Somerville Indians and Brass Ankle Family. So when I do see it online, sometimes people say, look at this Native woman. They say her name was Brass Ankle. That is not what it was. The Brass Ankle was usually a racial slur used for Native Americans or people who were not white but looked very similar to white because you weren't white, but you weren't African American. But it is just one of those things. And going into this picture, you'll see my great uncle. This is also a news clipping. One of the reasons why anti-miscegenation and the siloing of these communities happened is because they were threatened by people. There were a lot of people who did not like Native people, did not like colored people, and you just didn't go outside of your communities. And when that happened, a lot of times bad things did happen. So we're just talking about the desegregation period. We saw that clip from 69. And my great uncle, he's in the picture. This is the news clipping about how he was stomped to death in a bar in the 70s after desegregation because he was kissing his wife who could pass for white. So for our communities, it's not like magically things just got better. For a lot of time, we remain siloed and still do somewhat to this day, especially when talking about our heritage or beliefs or culture. So we're getting back into affairs and recognition. So the Catawba Nation was officially recognized in 1941. This was with a lot of conversations that happened between the Catawba and the state of South Carolina going from the 1800s into the 1900s about land claims. So eventually the BIA came in, they were federally recognized. And sadly, right after that, termination era came. It was an era that lasted through 3 different administrations. It lasted from the 50s going into the 70s. And during this time period, a lot of tribes were identified, but not recognized, as well as many tribes that got recognized having their recognition stripped away from them. The termination era was mainly in a lot of documents talking about how it seeked to reintegrate the American Indian into American society while also reclaiming reservation land. So during this time period, like I mentioned, you see the rise of Indian communities. This is something that I know when I went to the UN, they talked about extensively when it talks to taking away the rights of indigenous people and the sovereignty of them by instead of talking about them as their own unique people, they're just communities in a larger community. So at the time, in a lot of BIA reports going up to 78, you will see Indian communities being referenced in a lot of reports. And during this time, up until 78, there was no official way of establishing federal recognition or gaining federal recognition. In this time, many states established a state recognition process. A lot of them were established in the 80s. I know for many states that have really good state Indian policies today. But this is just some excerpts from some BIA reports that you see the Catawba tribe, the Somerville Indians, Brass Ankles, Four Hole, Lumbee, Santee, Somerville Indians again. And so even during the termination era, our communities didn't disappear. They just stopped getting support from the federal government or never did get support from the federal government. And as I mentioned, the BIA process was officially established for the federal recognition in 1978. That is when the process we know of now exists. This process, only less than 50 tribes, I believe, have gotten through. A lot of separate reports have gone on from both the Congress, with both the House and the Senate, saying it's a very flawed process, especially for those East Coast tribes from first contact, because while a lot of East Coast tribes can claim the 1900s and previous, they'd have to give up a lot of their ancestral ties when it comes to first contact, just because of the lack of records that were maintained by both the colonial government and after all these conflicts. So during this time where there is no recognition and there is a fight for recognition from the Native American people, I know that Stephen, you probably recognize this picture. This is from your website. So right here, we see one of the first gatherings of the Council of Chiefs, so what it becomes to be known as. This is in 1986, where a lot of Native leaders started coming together to say, we really need change in South Carolina to preserve our people and help our people. And one of the things that did eventually lead to was the Palmetto Indian Affairs Commission. This was created in 1986 by executive order of Governor Riley. This lasted only through his administration. And while it did create voices for these communities, it did not really give them official recognition. It did, though, give them a foot in the door that was then later removed after he was left office. At the same time, the Catawba had been fighting very diligently for a 20-year court battle for their rights as a tribe. They did eventually win, but when winning, they were subjugated to a lot of restrictions that were unfairly put upon them that no other federally recognized tribes have. In present day, they have been able to expand into North Carolina to get out of some of these restrictions, a lot of it within gaming and self-governance. And they've been doing a good job of trying to work within the foundations that were forced upon them. So going into 2001, a group of Native people once again approached that governor. This was Governor Hodges, and Governor Hodges created an ad hoc committee to see what was needed by the Native people to further support them and meet their needs. And this committee decided that there needed to be an official seat in the government. So Native American Affairs was added to the Commission on Minority Affairs. This was in 2003. Not only was Native American Affairs added to that commission, but so was Asian American Pacific Islander, Hispanic, Latino as well. So they were added to this division of Native American Affairs in the South Carolina Commission on Minority Affairs, and an official state recognition process was created. In 2003, that was the first Native American Heritage Month by Governor Sanford that was ever done in South Carolina. Many of the people referenced in this later became the state recognized tribe, and of course the Catawba Nation, the federally recognized tribe. So state recognition, although the concept and the policy was created officially in 2003, the first state recognition to happen only happened in 2005. That was the first two recognized tribes were the PD Nation of Upper South Carolina, as well as the Waccamaw Indian people. And the first two groups to be recognized was the Eastern Cherokee, Southern Iroquois, and United Tribes of South Carolina, and the Wassamasaw Tribe of Varnatown Indians. After this, many other tribes would then be recognized all the way up until, I believe, the last tribe was in 2015. The recognition process requires you to once again go back to the 1900s to show that you had a Native American community. It tried to mirror a lot of the things that were seen in federal recognition, but be less of a burden of proof when it comes to certain records from first contact. So mainly it went to the 1900s for state recognition. And you also had to have at least 100 living descendants from your progenitors in your community. You had to work very closely with the Archives of History because everything submitted has to be verified by them. So it's a very stringent process that took some tribes many years. We also have 4 Indian groups that were recognized in South Carolina. These Indian groups were constructed mainly like heritage societies. Some tribes became a group first and then updated their petition to become a tribe, only because at that time they had already seen the Palmetto Indian Affairs Commission rise and fall. So they did not know how long this process would last, and it seems to have lasted. It has been about, what, 25 years almost, 24 years. So the members of those tribes, being the Catawba, the state recognized tribes, and the Indians, all make up our Native American Advisory Committee for the state. So for the Commission on Minority Affairs, they come with issues. The commission reports those issues to legislators, as well as the governor in some cases, and to help try to bridge the gap and to facilitate services, especially through state agencies, to provide services that these tribes may need. So talking about some legislation, let me just move this real quick. Some legislation that was first created right around the time of state recognition. We have the Native American marriage law. This basically gave tribal chiefs the same status as a religious holy man, where they can officiate weddings in South Carolina. They had a Native American special license plate law in the books as well as the Turkey Feathers and Native American Art Bill, which went in tandem with the Arts and Craft Act. These bills are all passed by the General Assembly, as well as some other policy changes being made in other state agencies to better accommodate for recognized tribes. So we did have in 2014, tribes were officially added to the South Carolina history books. It wasn't what we wanted. Mainly it was a lot of bullet points. Mainly the tribes that are talked about is, Cherokee, as well as the Yamasee due to the Yamasee War. In 2014, they were officially added, although it constantly gets updated. The issue sometimes is how long it takes for schools to get new history books. So the history books that do talk more about tribal history, that is very accurate and very, very inclusive, it'll take many years for that to hit the desks of students. There are a lot of initiatives currently going on with talking with tribes about consultation of education committees and legislation that may be passed similar to other states where it requires consultation with tribes and creating curricula. I know that there are organizations like Indigenize SC, SCETV. They're planning, I believe, another web series about students in school talking about how they were representative or weren't represented. And that is something that we are definitely looking forward to. So Native American businesses. So as I mentioned earlier, Native Americans, we had businesses in our community. A lot of our people in our community were tradespeople who did not have business licenses or official businesses. So there were a lot of transitions. I know that Mr. Henry Clark, he was one of the first Native Americans, if not the first in South Carolina, who got his building license. I know that Chris and I think Stephen as well interviewed him. He is sadly passed, who was also one of the alum from one of the Indian schools. And although he had very much trouble reading and writing, he was a very intelligent man and made a very, very good business. So in 2017, the CMA released its first Native American Business Directory and Resource Guide. This was updated again in 2019, and with the CMA's addition of the Small Minority Business Certification Program, there's a lot of hope to keep improving businesses in Native American communities. Of course, the Catawba have their economic development, which was very instrumental in helping construct this book as well when it first released. There's a lot of hope out there to connect Native people with a lot more resources to help inject economic development in these communities. The CMA is having their a Small Minority Business Summit in February the 22nd in North Charleston. We're hoping to bring that, hopefully yearly maybe, around the state to try to help both our Native American communities and other minority communities find these resources that are needed. So in 2020, the tribe of South Carolina for the first time were added to the census. I know it's very small. This is the best one I could find. I don't know why. But there were a lot of issues with the census too. So while the tribes were added, it was a very new thing that they were experimenting with. There was a lot of issues, I know, for the Edisto Natchez Coosa tribe. I know that they were combined with another tribe in another state for some reason, and they had to later get that fixed. We're having a lot of consultations, and tribes are being consulted by the U.S. Census to hopefully, for the next main census in 2030 to get a much better read. The CMA and our research division is also hoping to do a statistical profile in partnership with each tribe. This would help get better numbers because even with the census, that mainly talks about anyone who identifies as Native American rather than anyone from a state or federally recognized tribe. So it gives a very different snapshot with the numbers. Okay, yep. So in 2023, Governor McMaster's invited the tribes of South Carolina to attend the State of the State. This was the first time that he had ever done so. This made a very big milestone, and a lot of state legislators, I think, first made aware of the tribes during this. And this has led to a lot of hopeful initiatives for a lot of land preservation. I know that Governor McMaster has been very vocal about trying to preserve land from development. So right now, talking about federal recognition, of course, I mentioned that very briefly with both the BIA as well as congressional recognition. There's currently a federal recognition bid of 4 tribes in South Carolina. These 4 tribes have each gotten a bill, and some of these tribes are even trying to go through the BIA route. Something about the BIA route I did forget to mention is that up until a few years ago, if you applied and were denied for any reason, you could not reapply. That was changed, but not retroactively. So I believe there are still tribes that are trying to reapply or get the right to reapply. But since that has changed, that has led to a lot of communities to try to research more and to find funding to do BIA packages because the fear of being denied and never being able to reapply is gone. But there is also the hope of a congressional route because congressionally, that has worked more than the BIA. Like I said, there are some tribes that have submitted their package almost at the start of the program and are still being reviewed. And there are some packages, many packages that cost over $1 million. And a lot of the tribes are very grassroots, where if they had $1 million, it would go back into supporting the community. And it's just not something that they could put into a 20-year process because especially with the development of South Carolina, in 20 years, they might not be here if they don't have preservation. So we're going into NAGPRA. And I see Nina on the here. She's been very instrumental in helping with the NAGPRA process. So for those of you who don't know, this is the Native American Graves Protection Act and Repatriation Act, thank you. So basically, whenever a Native American body was dug up for many years, it was sent to the state archives or it stayed with the state parks. And there was really no way to return it. Based on this act, it could only be returned by a member of a federally recognized tribe or a federally recognized tribe. There was a little bit of a chance when we were working to try to get state recognized tribes because at the time there was the policy that it was unidentifiable remains and state recognized tribes had the potential to claim that if no federally recognized tribe objected to it. That policy did change federally where I think now there is no longer any unidentifiable remains because every county and every state I think has a federally recognized tribe that is assigned to it. So there is a lot of work being done. I know that there are a lot of consultations happening. I know that some state parks are even working to try to put native remains back in the state parks and put like a memorial up just to put them back where they were found, especially for some of the tribes that are culturally extinct, like the Kiowa from Charlestown Landing, etc. So land preservation initiatives, as I mentioned a bit earlier, South Carolina is one of the fastest growing states in the nation. And I think we get about 300,000 to 400,000 people a year. And in a state where the Native American population, if you're only talking about from the recognized tribes, is maybe 12,000, most likely less, the land is shrinking. And the sad part is it was land that a lot of people at the time found undesirable that we were pushed on. I know former mayor of Goose Creek, Michael Heitzler, he wrote a lot of books about where our tribe was put in Carnes Crossroads, wrapping up to the Wassamasaw Swamp area. And he called it the middle ground and the barren place because nothing would really grow. You couldn't really farm that well. For the part that was more in the swamp area, it was swamp and flooding. So no one wanted it, which was why we were able to settle there. And now it's a growth corridor. And you see these growth corridors popping up all over South Carolina. You know, one of the things that you see is a lot of times as legislators, they're talking about the great development, the state's getting bigger, more things are getting developed. But in the what is being called progress is also pushing us out again. Because, we were pushed from the coast inland, and now in present day, we're being pushed inland elsewhere. Some of the land that we own or we did own now goes for acres for millions of dollars. And some people can't afford the taxes. You can't afford to keep the land in the communities. So we are pushing at the CMA and hopefully on a state level to see more resources and more preservation efforts. I know that there has been talks amongst the tribes and hopefully to pursue with legislation for maybe a state reservation law. This would also assist in the Catawba Nation for some of the difficulty it is because of their unfair lawsuit on getting land into trust for the Catawba, etc. But this would also help tribes preserve the land that they do have and the tribal citizens preserve the land that they do have. So there are two pieces of legislation that are currently introduced. One is for a state holiday for an Indigenous Peoples Day holiday. This isn't to replace Columbus Day. This is just, and there is also the hunting and fishing license permit bill. This would allow Native American people from state recognized tribes to have hunting and fishing licenses or discounted licenses, etc. Both of these laws have been on the books before, but were not passed last session. The Secretary of State is also pursuing support for Indigenous peoples' intellectual property rights, because while these are very poor communities, there are a lot of bad actors out there who in a lot of cases use the name of tribes to try to get grants, to try to go ask people for funding. You see a lot of different people popping up. You see many different Wakamas, many different Natchez Kusos, Wasamasas, Catawbas even now popping up. And it's getting to a point where even the leaders of the state say there needs to be a change to protect Native American tribes' intellectual property rights. So we have a questions time period. That is a lot of some of the very brief but very fast trying to go into a lot of the stuff that is going on throughout the state. I wanted to leave some time for questions.